Falling for Maria, written by Heather B. Moore, narrated by Exie Sands. 1. Maria smoothed the striped skirt over her hips, wondering if the pattern was too bold for the employee meeting that morning. The company emails about the new dress policies had been quite clear, and over the past couple of weeks she'd worn less color and fewer accessories and tried to tone down her colorful and patterned wardrobe, but she wasn't about to purchase a new wardrobe for a job she'd been working at for nearly a year. Successfully, she might add. She bypassed her favorite silver hoop earrings and picked up the gold love knots that were almost too small to see. Then she twisted back her dark wavy hair and added a plain black clip. There. Her image in the mirror said she was conservative, didn't it? She'd even chosen a pale pink lipstick versus her usual candy red. Maria grabbed her purse and keys and phone and headed out of her apartment in a trendy community on the edge of Seattle. The drive wasn't far in miles, but Seattle traffic could be horrible. Her phone notified her of a series of text messages coming through from her best friends, Sydney and June. The three of them had graduated from high school together and had been college roommates at Washington University. Now they were spread out along the West Coast at their various jobs. Twice a year they got together for girls-only weekends. "Good luck this morning," Sydney had texted. "Update us after the meeting," June added. Maria worked for a small internet marketing firm, which had recently been acquired by a larger company. That was when the emails had started coming in with all the new company policies sent out by their new manager, Walker Harris, whom they all would meet this morning for the first time. The new company policies included that lunch was restricted to 45 minutes, quarterly reports were now monthly reports, no plants or other organic matter was allowed, which she planned to fight, and everyone was expected to work one Saturday a month. The new dress code had been most surprising to Maria. She spent most of her time on the computer anyway, so what did it matter what she wore to the office? The gray carpet, pale walls, and brown chairs were all so drab. Her cubicle looked like an oasis in the middle of the desert with her colorful herbal pots and her collection of birdhouses. She kept only a few small ones in her cubicle. Some of them she'd built and painted, others she'd found at thrift stores. Her coworkers had even gone so far as to give her a birdhouse on her last birthday, and she'd loved it. But with the new company policies, she'd have to get rid of all of it. Maria typed a quick reply to her friends before starting to drive, then flipped down the mirror and decided to go with the red lipstick after all. She dug out a tube from her purse and lathered on the dark red color. Perfect. She turned up the radio as she drove to the office. She'd planned to be 30 minutes early, but when she pulled into the parking lot, she only had 10 minutes to spare. Maria hated to be rushed, and especially for a meeting like this, when she'd have to argue her case against some stuffy corporate type. She climbed out of her car and headed for the office doors. She wondered if she should have called her coworkers last night to explain what her plan was and asked them to support her if there was any pushback from Mr. Harris. I should have at least called Josh, she mused. Josh, who was over HR, and whom she'd been dating on the lowdown. He didn't want to make their relationship known at the office yet, and it seemed that had carried over further than the office. Maria had told her friends, of course, but Josh hadn't said anything to his friends or his parents. Except for that one irritant, Josh met all of her requirements for a relationship. Maria was attracted to him. Josh got along with his parents. He was easygoing. He had a steady job. He wanted kids when he married. He was only a couple years older than she. He didn't have an ex-wife, and he was okay with Maria's fashion choices and quirks. The list wasn't too impossible, Maria decided, especially since Josh met all items. She felt impatient about the whole secret relationship thing. She understood it from an employee perspective, but it wasn't like Josh was her boss. She just didn't know why, after several months of dating, they had yet to meet each other's parents. Maybe tonight would be the night she'd bring up the subject again on their dinner date. If she was on a roll from the company meeting and fighting for her fashion and cubicle rights, what was one more request? "Hi, Maria," Lisa said as Maria entered the building. Lisa sat at the reception desk, her turquoise-framed glasses perched on her nose. Lisa wore a different pair of glasses every day, it seemed. She believed in matching her eyewear to her outfit, and Maria wholeheartedly approved. "Is Mr. Harris here yet?" Maria asked. "I was hoping to get here earlier to talk to people in the office." Mr. Harris is running about 20 minutes late, Lisa said, drawing her brows together. So you've got some time. What's up? Maria leaned on the counter separating her and Lisa and explained that she was going to request that the dress code remain flexible and that the cubicles remain personal choice. I totally agree with you, Lisa said, snapping her gum and pushing up her glasses. I don't want to say goodbye to my turtles. Maria smiled. Lisa's turtles were a row of ceramic creatures she lined up on the left side of her desk. Apparently, she collected them in odd touristy shops when she traveled. Save the turtles? Maria said, holding out her fist for a fist bump. Lisa bumped her and smiled. Save the turtles. Maria continued through the next set of doors, where her cubicle sat connected to 8 others. On the other side of the cubicles was Josh's glassed-in office. She could see that Josh was already at his desk. Love the skirt, Maria, Ben said from his cubicle as she passed by. Too flashy? She asked. Ben's brows arched. I don't think so, but this dress code is wearing me down. I had to go with the blue tie instead of the rainbow one today. Ben was a heavy-set man who never wore anything as formal as ties, said they made him feel like choking. His wardrobe of choice was golf shirts, which lent him to frequently boasting about his weekend golf scores. Maria laughed. What a sacrifice. She asked him if he'd support her when she made a case for the dress code change. I'll drink to that any day. He held up his coffee cup. Thanks, Maria said, and moved past him, walking straight to Josh's office. He looked up from the computer as she entered. Josh's blonde hair and blue eyes contrasted with Maria's olive skin, dark hair, and brown eyes. Josh was good-looking, but not in the striking way that attracted women left and right. His looks had grown on Maria, and although she wouldn't say that she lost sleep over thinking about him, she felt comfortable with him and enjoyed every minute they spent together. Right now, though, Josh cast a furtive glance at the door. Didn't you get my message? He asked, standing and shutting the door. No, Maria said, pulling out her phone. There was a voicemail alert, but she'd had her radio turned up and must not have heard her phone while driving. Josh puffed out a breath and folded his arms. For the next week, we can't be seen talking one-on-one while the new executive is here. I read through the HR policies last night, and it specifically forbids any inter-office relationships. It even goes so far as to say that after-work activities aren't allowed either. Every employee is to be on strictly professional terms with each other, or they'll be subject to termination. Maria wanted to laugh. This was really going overboard, and how would corporate monitor it anyway? She tilted her head. So one of us will have to quit, huh? Josh snapped his gaze to her. Are you kidding? Maria's stomach tumbled at the panic in his voice. I am kidding. You're really wound up about this. I mean, who's going to monitor all of this? Me, Maria, Josh said. I'm the human resources manager. His usual soft blue gaze had turned cold. Maria took a step back. This was not how she thought her morning was going to go. She'd steeled herself for the company meeting, not a confrontation with her boyfriend. All right, we can talk about this later. I'm going to argue the dress code and the cubicle restrictions in the meeting. I'm hoping that a few of you can back me up. Josh stared at her as if she was crazy. Do you understand that all of our jobs are on the line here? When a company is restructured, it's only a matter of time for most of us. You think they're going to let us all go? Not all of us, but I think there will be cutbacks, Josh said, his tone softening. I think the dress code is ridiculous, too, but I'm not going to rock the boat right now, Maria. Maria swallowed against the growing lump in her throat. She was mortified to feel her eyes stinging with tears. The company meeting hadn't even started, and now she felt like she was going to lose it. Look, Josh said, we're not doing anything different than before and keeping our relationship a secret. That's not what I'm worried about, Maria said. Not anymore. All of this was getting bigger than she could live with. She didn't want to be 26 with a secret boyfriend or being told what to wear. She was a college graduate. She was smart. She was independent. And she liked to think she was at least a little pretty. She didn't like being put down or locked away by anyone, not her boyfriend or some hotshot executive. I'll see you in the meeting, Maria said, and before Josh could say anything else, she opened the door and left his office. She hurried to the ladies' room to compose herself and meet her own determined gaze in the mirror. Either she'd have to be accepted at this company for who she was, or she'd start looking for another job. Mind made up, she sent a long text to June and Sydney telling them about what Josh said about the new relationship policies, then ending with, "I won't be able to check back for at least another hour." 2. Maria tapped her pen on the table as she and her coworkers sat in nervous silence, waiting for Mr. Harris to arrive. Lisa had announced his arrival on the intercom, and everyone had quickly straightened up and put away their phones. Maria had her notepad and pen out, but she didn't have her laptop with her like the others. She wanted to take more organic notes. It helped her pay better attention. At the top of the note paper, she'd written 2 things: dress code and cubicle decor. And she'd added another, in parentheses, inter-office relationships. It was something she wanted to bring up to Mr. Harris alone, if at all possible. She didn't know if she'd be able to secure a private conversation with him, though. But Lisa said he'd wanted individual meetings with each department, so Maria hoped she might have a chance, since she ran the social media division. Lisa sailed into the room, her face flushed beneath her turquoise glasses, and behind her, a man walked in. All eyes snapped up to study Mr. Harris. He was younger than Maria expected, maybe 30, tops, and he was stunning. Maria didn't know how else to describe Walker Harris. Her friend Sydney would call him a babe, and June would call him gorgeous, and Maria would call him off limits. Every woman, and even the men, were staring at him like he was some sort of exhibit. Now Maria understood Lisa's flushed face and the extra high pitch in her voice as she began to make the introductions. Mr. Harris's hair was dark, wavy, and perfectly styled, like a male model photoshopped in a magazine. His custom-tailored dark gray suit looked like it cost more than Maria's 2-month salary, and it accentuated his olive skin and flashing green eyes. Mr. Harris was tall and seemed to dwarf the small conference room as if he was larger than life. His broad shoulders did little to diminish his intimidating size. If it wasn't for his perfectly even white teeth and his elegantly long fingers, Maria might have thought he was a former football player. As it was, he was too well-groomed to dirty himself up with sport, but he must do something to stay in shape. To top it off, he seemed completely nonplussed that everyone in the room was trying not to openly ogle him. "And this is Maria, our social media director," Lisa said. Mr. Harris held out his hand, and, like the others, Maria stood and shook his hand. Their contact was brief, but Maria could still feel the warm imprint of his hand after he moved on to the next person. Her stomach tightened, and her thoughts scattered. "Stop it," she silently ordered herself. She would stay on task, no matter how good this man looked. He was probably married, although there was no wedding ring visible. Maybe he was one of those men who was married but didn't wear a ring? Or, more likely, he had a girlfriend who was royalty or a celebrity. "Stop looking at him," she commanded herself again. She had a boyfriend. Mr. Harris was here to conduct a meeting and recreate their company structure. He moved to the head of the table and sat down. "Thanks for making this early morning meeting a priority," he said. "I apologize for being late. And please, everyone, call me Walker. I know there are a lot of changes going on that you'll have to get used to, but Mr. Harris is my father, not me." Ben chuckled, and everyone looked at him as if he'd breached some sort of code of ethics. Mr. Harris, or Walker, shifted forward in his chair. "Just a little bit about myself, then," he said. "I've worked for Baker Corp for about 8 years now. My father started the company, and even though I'm the boss's son, I've had to prove myself like everyone else." His voice was firm, and Maria wondered if he'd been given a hard time over the years by other employees. "I've been assigned this company to bring it up to Baker Corp standards and to train you on our policies and procedures," Walker continued. "This will mean flexibility on each of your parts and a good deal of understanding. At Baker, we've developed policies and procedures that have contributed to our business success, so as we acquire new companies, we feel it's important to take the time in the training phase." Everyone was nodding, and Maria, in order to avoid staring at him, took haphazard notes that looked more like doodles than actual words. Out of the corner of her eyes, she saw him hold up a stapled stack of pages. Lisa will hand out the agenda, and we'll start going down it line by line. You can ask for clarifications as we get to each item, but let's try to stay on task. One of our priorities at Baker is staying on task and optimizing each workday. When Maria got the copy of the agenda, she scanned the items. Halfway down the page, it said dress code, and a few lines farther down, cubicle space. She braced herself for what was to come. As Walker went down the items, he did 99% of the speaking. Basically, everyone was agreeing with everything and asking no questions. When Lisa did ask a question about the length of lunch breaks, her voice was so breathless and giggly that Maria found herself cringing. But Walker didn't seem to notice her fawning. He must be used to it, Maria decided. Maria glanced over at Josh. He had on his typical HR face, no emotion. Maria's heart began to drum as they reached the topic of dress code. Walker read through the dress code policy, the same words he'd emailed out to their group, then said, "Are there any questions?" Predictably, no one said anything. "It's now or never." Maria lifted a hand and said, "I'd like to ask a few questions." She looked at Walker for the first time since they'd shaken hands. His green eyes locked with hers, and she knew she had his full and complete attention. It unnerved her. As she spoke, Walker's gaze slowly trailed along her hair, her earrings, and her blouse, which was all conservative compared to her usual outfits. Her lipstick was red, yes, and she could have ditched the red, black, and white checked scarf and not added stripes to her nail polish to match her skirt. "I've never met one of our clients in person," Maria continued. "Wearing bright colors or strappy dresses hasn't had a negative impact on my job performance, and shouldn't for anyone else either." "There have been studies, Maria, that have been conducted for decades that prove that a dress code in a workplace adds to the employee's productivity," Walker said in a slow voice as if he was speaking to a child. "It ensures fewer distractions and fewer temptations to veer into off-topic conversations." "That might be the case," Maria said, "and I don't mean to refute decades of research, but this sounds like an argument between parents discussing whether or not their kids should wear school uniforms." She looked around the table at her coworkers. No one met her eyes. "Really?" She turned back to Walker, finding it disconcerting that he was watching her carefully. "I'll make a note of your thoughts," he said, when in fact he wasn't writing anything down at all. Then, as if he hadn't cut her off, he said, "Next on the agenda is the cubicle spaces. I trust everyone has read the guidelines. Are there questions?" Maria waited a heartbeat, then lifted a hand again. Walker acted as if he'd expected her to. One side of his mouth lifted ever so slightly as if he was amused. Was he mocking her? "Yes, Maria," he said in a perfectly even voice. "I work better if I don't feel like I'm going to fall asleep surrounded by gray and tan partitions." One of Walker's eyebrows shot up. Maria pressed on. "I mean, we're a marketing company. We should be allowed to bring things in that give us inspiration and encourage our creativity." Across the table, Lisa was nodding. Maybe she'd at least support Maria in this. "Studies have shown that tangible distractions can actually curb creativity and diminish profitability," Walker said in his perfectly even tone, which was becoming perfectly annoying. "Decades of studies?" Maria asked, then felt instantly contrite. Walker didn't react. In fact, it was like her quip hadn't registered with him. Instead, he said, "What sort of decor do you have in your cubicle?" Maria glanced at Lisa again, who was now conveniently studying her nails. "I have a collection of birdhouses and a few herb pots, but that's not the point. Any of us should be able to surround ourselves with things that make us happy." "Happy," Walker said. She couldn't read his expression. She couldn't tell if he was baiting her or merely wanting to understand. But how could he be so obtuse? How could he buy into these whitewashing policies? "Yes, happy," Maria said. "Things like birdhouses, colorful skirts, big earrings, and spicy food shared with a coworker make me happy." The faintest bit of color stole across Walker's cheeks, but was gone before Maria could be sure. I'll make a note of your concerns, he said. The next item on the agenda has to do with interpersonal relationships among coworkers. Perhaps I should start by asking if Maria has any questions? Her coworkers chuckled. Traitors. Sir, she said, I think Josh is the one with questions about this policy. If a pin had been dropped on the table at that moment, it would have echoed like a gunshot. Josh shook his head and shot a death glare at Maria before turning to face Mr. Harris. I don't have any questions about the policy. It was clearly stated in the procedures manual. Very well, Walker said, looking at the others around the table. Any other questions about this particular item? No one spoke. No one asked a question. Maria had been betrayed. She didn't care about her lonely yellow and red skirts in her closet back home that she might never get to wear to work again, or the birdhouses that she'd have to relocate, but she did care that her boyfriend, the man she'd given her heart to, had once again acted as if she didn't exist at all. For the record, she spoke up before Walker could announce the next agenda item, I do have a question about the interpersonal relationship policies of Baker Corp. Go ahead, Walker deadpanned. Are all of the executives at Baker cookie-cutter robots like you? Lisa gasped. Ben lowered his head. Josh turned red. Maria didn't notice anyone else because she knew she had to leave the room immediately. She stood and picked up her pen and notebook. Then, without another word, she walked out of the conference room. 3. The sun had sunk low against the horizon, casting orange and gold tones across Maria's balcony and tinting the leaves of the surrounding potted plants gold. Maria sat curled up on the deck chair as she listened to the sounds of traffic below and breathed in the mixture of the blooming plants and the moist Seattle air. She had turned off her cell phone after walking out of the meeting. She'd driven aimlessly for about an hour, then ended up at a coffee shop where she had bought a couple of muffins. Once back at her apartment, she'd eaten a muffin and changed out of her conservative clothing into an orange floral sundress. She undid her hair and let her dark curls fly free. Then she made tea, and while eating the second muffin, she registered with 3 online job sites. At some point, she might have cried a little, might have napped a little, but mostly the day had been a blur. There might be a termination email in her inbox right then. Tomorrow, she'd check her email. But she knew she had to update her friends, tell them about the mess she'd made, ask them if they thought it could be salvaged, ask herself if she wanted to salvage it. She had a few thousand in her savings account and a decent credit limit on her credit card. She estimated she could survive 4 to 5 months unemployed. Beyond that, things would get sketchy. But by turning on her cell, she might see the trail of damage she'd done that morning in the meeting. Reluctantly, she reached for her phone and powered it on. A couple of text messages popped up, all from Sydney and June. She opened those first and read the usual questions full of concern. Maria had never gone completely dark like this. The next text was from an unknown number. She stared at the words and guessed it must be from Walker Harris, which shouldn't surprise her, yet it did. Let's meet. No apology, no questions, nothing but a request. Or was it a demand? It had been sent at 1:35 p.m., so hours after she'd left, and according to previous emails, during the scheduled employee lunch break that ran from 1 p.m. to 1:45 p.m. There was nothing from Josh. No text, no call. It was now 6:30 p.m., and Josh had been finished with the workday for over an hour. They'd planned to go to dinner right after work, then catch a movie. It seemed he'd ditched that plan. Not that Maria could completely blame him. She'd pretty much stolen all the balls and kept them in her court. Maria opened up Walker's text again and saved the number into her contacts as ex-boss. Then she called Sydney. Took you long enough, Sydney said. How was the meeting? I'm conferencing in June, too. Hang on, Maria said. Moments later, they were all connected, which was pretty miraculous since it was a Friday night. When Maria started spilling out the whole story to her friend, she fully expected to start crying and ranting, but instead, she found herself laughing. Sydney and June were shocked at first. Then they started to laugh too. "You walked out?" Sydney kept saying, unable to get over it. "And Mr. Gorgeous texted you during his scheduled lunch break?" "Yeah, it's all so ridiculous," Maria said. "I guess I should have seen the writing on the wall when I got the first email about the new company policies. I can always find a new job, though I'm not too sure about a new boyfriend." The women on the other line were silent for a moment. Then June said, "I can come up tonight. My plans have fallen through anyway. Portland isn't so far." "It's okay," Maria said. "I'll be all right, and I should probably get the conversation with my soon-to-be ex-boss over with as soon as possible so I can take the weekend to regroup." "If you're sure," June said. "I'm sure," Maria affirmed. She knew June was dating someone new. Her fallen-through plans would be because of Maria, and she didn't want that guilt trip. She'd gotten herself into this situation, and she'd find a way out. After hanging up with her friends, Maria scrolled through her texts again. Why hadn't Josh called or texted? Yes, she could call him, but it really bothered her that he hadn't even tried to reach out. If the situation had been the other way around, would she have reached out to him? Of course she would have. She leaned back and closed her eyes, wondering what she should do. This entire day was already a bust, so what else could make it worse? Opening her eyes, she dialed Josh's number. He answered on the fourth ring, which frankly surprised her since she was wondering if she had any value to him at all. Before she could even greet him, he started to talk. "Everyone thinks you quit," Josh said. "Why did you walk out of the meeting? You should have seen Walker Harris's face." "I don't care about Walker Harris's face," Maria said. "I care about what yours looked like when I was trying to get some support." "What are you talking about?" Josh asked. "I didn't ever say I wanted to push back on the new policies. I'm more interested in keeping my job than arguing about whether or not I can wear a bunch of mismatching outfits." "My outfits match," Maria retorted. Josh went silent for a moment. "Things aren't looking good for you, Maria. Even though I'm over human resources and can put in my recommendations, everyone saw you blow up and leave. That was totally unprofessional, which is the exact reason Baker Corp has the policies it does to keep the work environment professional." Maria rose from her chair and started to pace the balcony. "They're turning us into yes men or yes women, whatever. And I can't work that way." "You can work that way," Josh countered. "Come on, Maria, it's a good job. Our coworkers are great people, and Walker isn't so bad as far as long-distance bosses go. He's only at our offices for the week, and then we won't have to deal with him again until next quarter." Maria stopped pacing and bit her lip. "What did he say after I left?" "Nothing specifically about you," Josh said. "He didn't speak for a full minute after you left, though. Then he continued with the agenda items. Later, he met with each division individually and went over our job description duties." "He texted me," Maria said. "How did he get my cell number?" "He asked me for it," Josh said. "Have you called him back?" "Not yet," she said. "Do you think he'll fire me over the phone or make me come in?" "I don't know," Josh said. "I told him to give you a break, that you have to get used to the changes." Maria blew out a breath. "Did you tell him about our relationship?" "Of course not," he said. Maria took that in stride, but she couldn't help digging deeper. "When are you going to tell your parents?" Josh huffed. "I don't know," he said. "Why are we talking about this now? Your job is on the line here." "Yeah, I know," Maria said. "I wonder how long we're going to date secretly, even though I'm a 26-year-old woman and you're 28. Will you ever grow up, Josh?" "What the hell is wrong with you?" Josh spat out. "Yesterday you were normal and today you're like out of control." Maria squeezed her eyes shut. "I don't get how you can stand by while I'm obviously struggling at work, especially when you're the freaking human resources director. And I don't get why our relationship has to be a secret from your best friends and your family. I mean, we've been dating for 9 months. That's like 2 years to a 20-year-old." "So you want a commitment?" Josh asked. "Is this what this is about?" "Not from you," Maria said. "I don't think you even know the definition of the word. I'm all for having fun, but I don't think it's healthy to have a boyfriend who wants to keep me a secret." "I think we're done, Josh."
"So you're gonna walk away?"
"I am," Maria said, thinking how she needed to revise her list of the perfect man. Well, there was no such thing as a perfect man, but the man who would be perfect for her. She'd have added, introduces me to his friends and family. By the time Maria hung up with Josh, her hands were shaking. She couldn't believe she'd broken up with him. She sat back on the lounge chair and waited for the tears to come, but nothing did. She waited a bit longer, but she was still dry-eyed. Hmm, she said to herself and lifted her head. Why wasn't she more sad? Why wasn't she crying? Why wasn't she throwing stuff off the balcony? The sun had set, and only a pink glow lingered in the sky, quickly replaced by a haze of violet. The sound of her phone ringing startled Maria. She turned it over in her hand and saw that the number she'd saved as ex-boss was glowing on her screen. She already knew she'd lost her job, so she might as well officially get it over with. "Hello?" she said in a firm, no-nonsense voice.
Maria.
The deep tenor of his voice brought the image of his dark hair and green eyes to mind. She hated the butterflies that spun in her stomach. "Mr. Harris, I need to apologize for walking out on the meeting, but my viewpoints have not changed."
Can you meet me downtown?
Maria was surprised. "At the office?"
I thought we could meet more informally, he said, for drinks.
Maria hesitated. "In a bar? Are you going to fire me in front of a bunch of people in a bar?"
Maria, we need to talk,
Walker said in his maddeningly even tone.
I'm not going to fire you. Your employment at Baker Corp is entirely in your hands.
"Where do you want to meet?" He rattled off an address to a sports grill, and she exhaled. "All right, I'm on my way." 4. It was an hour and a half before Maria arrived at the agreed-upon sports bar. She'd decided to go all out and dressed as if she was going for a night on the town with her girlfriends. She wore a short blue dress with a flirty skirt, strappy rhinestone stilettos, a row of silver bracelets on both arms, her hair straightened to a sleek shine, dark eyeliner, and deep red lipstick. She knew she would turn heads, and she was counting on it. When Maria entered the sports bar, the lighting was dim, the lights strategically placed, accentuating the tables beneath the row of flat screens showing various ESPN channels. She spotted Walker right away. He was larger than life in a sports bar, too. And two women were chatting with him. Maria started to walk toward him before he noticed her, and she was grateful at the eyes following her, showing him she wasn't invisible. Before she reached him, another man crossed in front of her.
Hey there,
the man said. His blonde hair was spiked, and he sported a goatee, along with a diamond stud beneath his lip. "Excuse me," Maria said, sidling past him, but the man moved again, so he blocked her way.
Where's a pretty thing like you going?
He asked. "Joining a friend, sir," Maria said. "Please excuse me." He leaned forward and inhaled.
You smell sweet, and I like my women sweet.
His fingers snaked around her arm, and Maria instinctively pulled away. She stepped back, deciding she'd escape to the bathroom for a few moments to ditch this guy, when a hand slipped around her waist.
She asked you to move, a deep voice said.
Maria knew that voice and looked up to see that Walker Harris was standing next to her, his arm possessively around her.
Yeah, the man said. I wanted to buy her a drink. She came in looking alone and upset. Are you upset, babe?
Walker asked, looking down at her. Maria could play along. Not until this man started to bother me. Good, Walker said, kissing her forehead and lingering slightly longer than was technically necessary. Warmth pulsed through Maria, and she decided it was because the situation was tense.
She's with me, Walker said. I can ask you nicely, or not too nicely, to leave us alone.
The man stepped forward. Guys like you think you can have any woman you want, but tonight it's going to be different. The man shoved Walker. It all happened so fast that Maria wasn't exactly sure who did what. Walker steered her behind him, then swung a fist into the man's face. The man staggered back, then dove into Walker. They crashed to the ground, and people swarmed them, pulling the two men apart. Then Walker was on his feet, grasping Maria's hand and leading her to the exit. They stepped outside in the cool evening. Clouds had gathered, and it had started to drizzle. "Where are we going?" Maria asked as Walker headed down the sidewalk at a brisk pace, still clutching her hand. He didn't speak until they were at least a block away. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Someone had called the cops. At the street corner, Walker released her hand while they waited for the light. He scrubbed his hand through his perfect hair, messing it up.
Where's your car?
"Parked behind the sports bar," Maria said, folding her arms against the cool air. "What was that all about? You started a brawl." Walker darted a glance at her and shook his head.
I will circle around the block, but I can't talk to the cops.
Maria stared at him. His left eye was swelling. "Looks like you're gonna have a nice bruise, too. The guy was a drunk, a jerk, too, but you shouldn't have hit him. He could press charges." The light turned green and Walker grabbed her hand again.
Come on, he said. We need to get moving.
Maria walked with him, although the brisk pace was starting to hurt her feet. When they reached the opposite corner, Walker finally slowed down and started walking in the opposite direction of the restaurant. 2 cop cars had arrived in front of the sports grill, and a good-sized crowd had spilled out of the place. "Mr. Harris," Maria said, tugging her hand from his, "I'm not going to run all over the city. My feet are killing me, and if you haven't noticed, it's raining. I'm going back to my car with or without you." Walker turned to look at her beneath the light of the street lamp. It was as if he'd just remembered she was with him. His gaze swept down her body, then back up.
That's some dress.
She didn't know if he was teasing her or giving her a compliment.
I saw you when you first came into the sports grill, Walker said. At first, I thought you knew the guy who was talking to you.
"No," Maria said. "I didn't know him. Did you know the women you were with?"
Never met them, Walker said. Neither of them were taking my brush-off hints.
Maria involuntarily shivered. "You looked like you were enjoying yourself." Walker shrugged off his jacket and set it on her shoulders.
Here, I'll walk you back. But let's stay on this side of the street until the cops leave.
This time they walked slowly together, and Maria was grateful for the extra warmth of his jacket. It was plain that Walker was stressed out about any confrontation with a cop. "So, what's the deal with running from the cops? I mean, if you wanted to avoid them, then maybe you shouldn't be hitting men in a bar." They were nearly across the street now from the sports grill.
That man wasn't going to back down, Walker said. And you could say I have a bit of a record, an old record. But I don't want anything in the paper that my dad could see.
"Your boss?"
Yeah,
Walker said, casting her a sideways glance. "What kind of record?" Maria ventured. Walker scrubbed his hand through his hair again, and Maria hid a smile. He looked like a little kid in trouble when he did that. They reached the next corner, and one of the cop cars pulled away. The crowd was dispersing, most of the people going back inside to take their seats again.
Juvie stuff, mostly, Walker said. Rebellion against a privileged and lonely life.
Maria was surprised at his admission. "Well, you seem to have your act together now." The edge of his mouth twitched.
Until about 10 minutes ago.
Maria's smile escaped. "Yeah, except for that." He paused again, looking down at her.
I knew you had a bad day, and you were probably thinking you were about to get fired, and then you came in looking like this. And that guy was so persistent.
He took a breath.
I don't have any excuse, except I lost it.
He was staring at her, and she felt the intensity of his gaze all the way to her toes. "Mr. Harris, I didn't even think you saw me as a person." Walker rubbed his neck and lowered his eyes. Then he exhaled, seeming to make some sort of decision.
When I walked into that conference room this morning, I tried very hard not to notice you, Maria. But to be honest, it was impossible.
Maria didn't know what to think. She focused on the restaurant across the street. The second cop car pulled away, and the street seemed almost empty now. "I dressed as conservatively as I could for that meeting. I didn't want to scare off our new manager." Walker chuckled.
I'm not talking about what you wore or didn't wear. It was your entire look. You could wear a brown sack and it would be hard not to notice you. You're a beautiful woman, Maria, and I'm sure you dress the way you do for a reason. He raised his hands. I wish I could change the company policies. I really do. We all have jobs to do here, and I need to do mine. If you still feel like you can't work in those conditions, then I can offer you a severance. But I'd like you to at least stick around and train whomever we hired to replace you. It was Maria's turn to stare at him. She didn't know whether to slap him or yell at him. I wear what I wear because it makes me happy. And I'm glad you didn't want to meet to talk about my choice of dress and then punch out a guy and then flirt with me. I'm glad it was to tell me thanks for your feedback, but no thanks. She shook her head and took a step away from him. I'm good at my job, Mr. Harris. All of my clients love me, and my evaluations show top client satisfaction. You're being a sexist pig. Walker stepped closer to her. The dress code is for both men and women, because attraction and distraction goes both ways. His eyes bore into hers, and if she wasn't mistaken, the fire in them wasn't anger, but passion. Maria held her ground. She wouldn't let him intimidate her or influence her in any way, even though he had punched a guy for harassing her. I've seen your evaluations and numbers, and I hope you won't leave, he said, his gaze smoldering. Will it really be so hard to follow the code? Even if I had the power, I can't change decades of company culture because one of the employees wants a birdhouse in her cubicle or wants to wear. He waved a hand at her dress. Tight dresses that make men brawl in a bar. Maybe he had a point. No, Maria wouldn't concede to it. The policies are ridiculous. I'm not advocating for cocktail dresses, Mr. Harris. Walker, he said. Mr. Harris is my father. Maria tilted her head. You're kind of hung up on being different than your father. Did he come up with the dress code? It's been working well for years, he said. So he wasn't going to get personal about his family. Maria blew out a breath, then turned from him and started for the corner. I'll see you on Monday, Mr. Harris, and I'll let you know my decision then. Walker was one step behind her. You shouldn't be on the street alone. Then walk me to my car, she said, but this conversation is over. 5. Monday couldn't come soon enough, and Maria had allowed herself to wallow on Saturday, then distract herself on Sunday by going to the swap meet and purchasing 3 new birdhouses. She'd vacillated between a strange sense of freedom, being an unattached single woman again, and a mild rush of panic over being back to the drawing board. Her proverbial perfect man for me list was getting an update. When in crisis, boyfriend should be calling to check up on me. Boyfriend shouldn't keep our relationship a secret from family and friends. And maybe she'd also add, doesn't have the propensity of getting into bar fights. Maria walked into the office at 7:30 a.m. She expected Lisa to be the only one there, but when Maria approached the desk, Lisa said, Glad you're back. Just so you know, Walker has set up shop in the conference room. He's reviewing all the financials today. Lisa scanned Maria's outfit. You look nice. I look boring. Maria had worn a gray pencil skirt, a white blouse, then added a yellow silk scarf along with yellow high heels. Her earrings were dangling daisies, but she'd straightened her hair, then smoothed it into a long ponytail. I like the yellow shoes. Not too colorful? Lisa smiled. I guess we'll find out. She leaned forward. I think there's more to Walker Harris than we think, she confided. He has a shiner, and when I asked him what happened, he actually blushed. Maria stilled. She should have thought about that black eye and how it would still be in evidence today. What was his answer? He said there was a misunderstanding over the weekend, Lisa said. But if you ask me, he's hiding something. No one that good-looking could have a boring weekend, if you know what I mean. Maria shrugged. I'd better get to work. She wasn't about to say anything to Lisa about Walker's black eye. Entering the main office area filled with cubicles, she saw that Josh wasn't at his desk yet. She wasn't looking forward to seeing him this morning. He hadn't reached out to her at all, and she'd only checked his Facebook page once, but he hadn't posted.
She passed by the conference room to see that the door was ajar. Walker was sitting with his back to her, clicking away on his laptop with several files spread out before him. She hovered near the door for a moment, then pushed it open. "Lisa says you have a shiner," she said as he turned to look at her. The bruising was blue and green around his left eye. "Oh," she said. He said nothing, just scanned her outfit, and when his gaze met hers, she felt her face flush. She could see the conflict in his eyes, as if he was admiring her but also censoring her. "Do I pass inspection?" One side of his mouth lifted, and his green eyes seemed to warm. "I think we can let the yellow heels slide," he said, turning more fully toward her. "Really? This was unexpected. Did someone knock some sense into you over the weekend?" He folded his hands in front of him. "I had a conversation with your apparently ex-boyfriend last night." His eyebrows lifted. "Josh told you?" "He did." Maria was stunned. "What did he say exactly?" "He told me you two had been dating, and you were really upset about the interpersonal relationship policy," Walker said. "As the HR director, Josh wanted me to give you some slack for emotional turmoil." "So he didn't ask for a policy change," Maria said. "He wanted you to go easy on me." When Walker nodded, she folded her arms. "Did he tell you we broke up?" "He said you dumped him Friday night, and by my estimation, that's right before you came to meet me," Walker said. "I had no idea. Are you all right?" "We didn't break up because of the company policy, if that's what you're asking," Maria said. "Not that it's any of your business, anyway." "Well, I'm sorry," Walker said, "if it's something to be sorry for." Maria shrugged. "I'm fine." "That's good to hear," he said, his gaze holding hers for a moment. Why did he have to look even better with a black eye? Like he was some big hero or something. Except for his shiner, he was back to looking like Mr. Perfect. His hair was perfectly wavy, his jaw free of any stubble. His suit coat only emphasized his broad shoulders, and the white of his dress shirt contrasted with his olive skin. His gray and blue tie looked expensive. Maria had a sharp urge to mess something up on him. "So, what did you decide about the job, Maria?" he asked. "I'm still thinking about it," Maria said. "Do I have a deadline?" Walker rubbed at his jaw. "If you're going to quit, I need to start the hiring process as soon as possible." "Hmm," Maria said. "Can I have until 5 p.m.? See how this day goes? Maybe see how Josh is around his secret ex-girlfriend? And see how it is to work one wall away from you?" His eyes widened, and one side of his mouth lifted as if he wanted to smile but wasn't going to allow himself to. "All right." "Thank you." He seemed surprised at her thanks. "There's one more thing," she said, stepping close to him. "I want you to try something for the day." She bent forward and tugged at the knot in his tie. She expected him to stop her, but he didn't move as she unknotted his tie and slid it off. One thing was for sure, he smelled great. Not like he'd doused himself with cologne, but like he'd used some sort of spicy soap. She straightened, his tie in her hand, then turned without another word and left him staring after her. Maria continued to her cubicle and rolled up the tie and set it inside her desk drawer. If he wanted it back, he'd have to ask her or search for it. Ben came in and saw her, his eyes growing wide. "You're back!" Maria smiled and shrugged. "Gotta pay the bills." Ben chuckled and moved to his cubicle to power up his computer. It was after 9 a.m. when Josh finally arrived at the office. By then, everything was humming along, and Maria was buried in reviewing a 6-month marketing proposal for one of her clients. It almost felt good to not have to pay attention to what Josh was doing or what he may or may not be saying, or to wonder when he was going to let people know they were dating, because that answer was now finalized. Never. An email alert popped up on her screen. There was to be a meeting right before lunch in the conference room. This made Maria glance over to the conference room door. It was still ajar, but from her position, she couldn't see Walker or what he was doing. She let out a sigh, and then her phone buzzed with a text. Can we talk? Josh texted. No, she wanted to reply. Instead, she got up, taking her phone with her, and walked to the Human Resources office. She knocked once, then opened the door. Josh looked up. Maria leaned against the door frame, not stepping inside or shutting the door. How are you? Josh asked, his blue eyes focused on her. His concern might have softened her before, but not now. Doing well, she said. You can put that in my HR file and share it with Mr. Harris. Maria, Josh said, rising to his feet. He crossed the room and tugged her inside, then shut the door. I only told him because I didn't want you to lose your job. So you think if you revealed the secret you were so determined to keep about our relationship, he'd go easy on me? She asked. Josh looked chagrined, but he said, yes. You're still here, right? Maria gave a short laugh. I told Walker I'd give him my final answer by the end of the day. She folded her arms. I'll stay on to train the new person if it comes down to that. Maria, Josh said, his voice soft. Don't you think you're taking things too far? I mean, we've been great together, haven't we? As long as things are convenient for you, it's all great, Maria said. I'm tired of being invisible in your life, and Walker Harris is no better. Now I'm being told what to wear and how to decorate my personal workspace. Josh's jaw tensed. Did you read the research reports that were attached to the email? It does make a lot of sense. He waved at her feet. I mean, yellow shoes? Who wears those? Maria took a step back. It's not like I special order my clothing and shoes. They're right off the racks of regular shops. She reached for the door handle. Goodbye, Josh. Have a nice life. When she walked out of the office, she stopped short. Walker was coming out of the conference room down the hall. He paused when he saw her. There was no turning back, Maria decided, so she started walking down the hall right toward Walker. What's going on? He said as she neared. Maria stopped and stared at him. He'd replaced his missing tie with a red one. You carry a spare tie? In case of spills, Walker said. Wow, I don't know what to say. Look, Maria, he said, lowering his voice. I'm sorry this has all been so hard on you and that you're coming off of a breakup, but Maria held up her hand. I'm not talking about Josh with you or anyone. Business is business, and my personal life isn't going to interfere. It's not like I'm asking you about your girlfriend or wife or whoever. See you at the meeting. She walked away. She'd finally made up her mind. After securing another job, she'd put in her 2 weeks' notice. A couple of hours later, Maria made her way to the conference room. She was the first one there, except for Walker. He looked as if he was about to say something when Lisa walked in carrying a stack of papers. Set the contracts here, Walker told Lisa. Contracts for what? Maria asked. He didn't have time to answer because just then Ben came in, followed by Josh and several other employees. When everyone was seated around the conference table, Walker said, I have your employee contract addendums here. Each of you were hired with a standard contract, but Baker Corp will now update them with their own legal terms and conditions. Go ahead and read over them, and let me know if you have any questions. Maria flipped through the 4-page contract, then stopped on one of the last paragraphs. It stated that by signing, she'd be agreeing to uphold all of the Baker Corp policies. She scanned for the termination clause and found that any breach of contract was cause for termination with no compensation package. Well, she would have to find that new job soon then. She took a deep breath and signed her name. She rose from the table and handed it to Walker. You're already finished, Maria? I am, she said. If there's nothing else, then I'll be going on lunch break. Walker eyed her, clearly surprised that she'd been so agreeable. So, is this your decision? Yes. She held his gaze. He didn't have to know that she would still be actively searching for a new job. But for now, she wasn't going to make any more waves. She thought she detected a pleased look in his eyes, but it quickly faded to his usual professionalism. Is there anything else? She asked. That's everything for now. Thank you. 6. Friday came, and Maria was exhausted from being polite. Polite to Josh, polite to Walker, polite to everyone in the office. It was as if they were all watching her, waiting for her to blow up or something. But she had kept a cool head, even though it felt like she was constantly balancing on a tightrope. She dressed conservatively, took home most of her birdhouses, and just plain worked hard. And she was filling out online applications for other marketing companies. She'd miss her clients. The only thing keeping her sane was chatting with either June or Sydney after work. Oh, and every morning, when she found Walker alone in the conference room pecking away at his laptop, she unknotted his tie and removed it. He said nothing, but watched her with amusement. She'd set the tie in her desk drawer alongside the other ones. By the next time she saw him, he was always wearing another tie. She wondered how many ties a man could own, or if there would come a point when he'd have to go shopping again. For now, she was getting quite a collection. Tonight, as she drove home, she hooked up her Bluetooth and called Sydney. "I made it through the week," Maria said. "That was a week for the history records," Sydney said with a laugh. "What are your plans this weekend?" "Nothing until Sunday," Maria said. "Going to take my mom to lunch for her birthday, but until then, it's all about me." "Sounds nice," Sydney said. "Unless Walker calls you again and invites you to a sports bar." "That won't happen," Maria said. "I've been a good employee, and he thinks he has me securely in his back pocket." "Oh, did I tell you I have an interview Monday?" "Already?" Sydney asked. Maria smiled to herself. "I doubt I'll get it. They said there were over 40 applicants, but it's local, and I like that. I don't want to telecommute because I'd start to drive myself crazy working from a home office." "I'd be the same way," Sydney said. "How's your boss's black eye?" "Hardly noticeable now," Maria said. "So at least I don't have to be reminded of the bar fight every time I see him. Although he's been sort of nice to me this week." "Do tell," Sydney said in a lowered tone. "He's been complimentary and giving me my space at the same time," Maria said. She'd arrived at her apartment complex now, and she parked the car, except for when he asked if I wanted to meet during the lunch hour. I told him no to that one. "He asked you to lunch?" Sydney's surprise was clear over the phone. Not like a lunch date, like a meeting over the lunch hour. Or should I say the 45-minute allotment? When Sydney didn't reply, Maria said, "What?" "I think your boss is into you, Maria." She laughed. "Hardly. If you saw him, you'd know what I mean. He could have any woman he wanted, and probably has several women on speed dial." "Has he talked about a wife or girlfriend?" Sydney asked. "He told me he wasn't married or seriously dating anyone," Maria said, gathering her purse and popping open her car door. "How did he happen to share that information?" Maria shut her car door, thinking for a moment. "It was in response to something else I said, but it was later on, so it was sort of a surprise. He walked past my cubicle and leaned in and told me. Then he walked away." "Hmm," Sydney said. "I stand by my first assessment. He's interested." Maria had reached her apartment door and unlocked it. "I don't think he meets any of my relationship requirements." "You still have that thing?" Sydney asked with a laugh. "I threw away the full list a long time ago, but I haven't forgotten the important points," Maria said. "Well, sometimes you have to take a chance," her friend said. "Sometimes you need to throw away the list." Maria released a sigh. "Well, this weekend I'm taking a break from everything." "Good for you." When Maria hung up with Sydney, she did just that. In fact, she didn't leave her apartment until late Sunday morning when she headed out to pick up her mom for lunch. Her parents lived in the same house she grew up in, and Maria always felt a bit nostalgic when she went back home. It was great to be independent and living on her own, but there was nothing like seeing her old house and remembering all the great memories there. "Maria," her mother said, opening the front door when she arrived. Maria stepped in and hugged her mother. "Happy birthday, Mom," she said. Her mother was petite, with a head full of dark hair and plenty of laugh lines around her eyes. "Dad," Maria said, spotting her father coming toward her. He still walked with a limp from his knee surgery a couple of months ago, but his brown eyes twinkled. He kissed Maria's cheek. "Your mother told me this is ladies only." Maria smiled. "Sorry, Dad." He waved her off. "Go have fun. There's a game I want to catch on TV." Maria and her mother loaded into Maria's car, and they drove to her mother's favorite French cafe. The croissants and pastries were to die for. The place wasn't too crowded for a Sunday afternoon, and Maria told her mother about the new company policies and how she wasn't happy about them, but was trying to compromise. "Good for you, Maria," her mother said. "I don't know if I could work with so many rules." Her mother had sold Avon for as long as Maria could remember, and with that job, her mother had always dressed to the nines with immaculate makeup. Even now, her mother was wearing a turquoise linen jacket over a cream blouse paired with cream capris and strappy sandals. She looked classy and colorful, the perfect combination. They ordered, and after the waitress walked away, the restaurant door opened and 3 people walked in. Maria only glanced over because she heard one of the men laugh, a familiar laugh. She blinked in disbelief when she saw Walker. Quickly, she looked away and hoped he wouldn't see her. She hadn't seen who he was with, but it seemed like a couple of older people.
Maria?
Walker said. Oh, no. She could practically feel him getting closer. She had to turn and acknowledge him now. When she turned, Walker had already arrived at her table, so she looked up into his green eyes.
What a small world,
he said, a half smile on his face. He cast a glance at her mother. Hi, Mr. Harris, Maria reluctantly said. This is my mother. He extended his hand to shake her mother's hand. Mr. Harris, her mother said, as in Maria's new boss?
Yes, that's me, he said, but please call me Walker. Mr. Harris is my father.
He motioned to the man and woman standing next to him. They looked like his parents?
This is my father, the real Mr. Harris, Walker said, and my mother, Janine Harris.
Maria's mouth almost dropped open, but she clamped it closed just in time. Walker was here. With his parents? Maybe one was his step-parent? But as she scanned each of their faces, she was convinced they were his real mother and father.
Mom and Dad, this is Maria.
His mother gasped and placed a hand on Maria's shoulder. Maria? The one you punched another guy over. Now Maria was truly stunned. Walker had told his parents about the bar incident? And his parents didn't seem mortified. They were smiling at her. When Walker told us about the fight, I knew I had to meet the woman behind the story. His mother continued to gush. She linked her arm through her husband's. Don't you think it's time our son met a woman he was willing to fight for, Phil? The real Mr. Harris cleared his throat, his eyes dancing with merriment. It was at that moment Maria noticed that Walker wasn't wearing a suit or tie. He wore jeans, which were nicely fitted and worn in the right places, and a polo shirt that did nothing to hide his muscular chest and shoulders.
It is an honor to meet you, Maria, Mr. Harris said. Walker has told me about some of your suggestions about the company dress code.
Right, because Mr. Phil Harris owned the company and he was the big boss. Maria's throat went dry. Well, then you'll be happy to know that I signed the employee contract, Maria said. Mr. Harris chuckled. For what it's worth, Janine said. I told them it was a bit too stuffy, especially for you millennials. She waved a hand at Walker. Both of my men are old school, I guess. Maria's mother was watching the entire interchange with great interest. Why don't you join us? We've just ordered, and I'd love to hear more about these company policies. Maria was telling me about them as well, and I'd love to know all about this bar fight. Maria wanted to crawl under the table, or better yet, run straight out of the restaurant and never stop. Thank you, Mr. Harris and his wife both said, and within moments they were all fitted around the rather small table. Walker sat next to Maria, while her mother beamed at her from across the table. On top of it all, his clean, spicy scent reached her, and she had to restrain herself from inhaling deeply. You're with your parents? Maria whispered to Walker as the older adults fell into a conversation of where are you from? Walker leaned closer to catch her quiet words.
Sundays are our traditional lunch together.
But you told me you were in juvie. I thought your parents were divorced or something. Walker's brows lifted.
No, my mom quit her charity organization for a few years when everything started to go wrong. She practically stalked all my activities, and although I resented it at first, I realized for the first time that my parents loved me unconditionally. When I started my freshman year in college, she went back to her charity work. but I never forgot her sacrifice. Which is probably why I work for my dad now.
Maria sat back, stunned. She'd assumed so much about Walker, when in fact he was becoming more and more like a regular guy. Wait, he was far from a regular guy. He'd singled her out in a restaurant and introduced her to his parents. They hadn't even been on a date yet, not that she was planning on dating him or expecting him to ask her out. Walker shifted close to Maria and whispered in her ear,
My mom already loves you.
Maria's heart thumped. She doesn't even know me.
When I told her about how I got my black eye, she told me that was the best news she'd had for years.
Walker continued. Maria turned to stare at him. He was really close. Too close. She swallowed. Why would any mother be happy about her son getting into a fight that could get him arrested? Walker bumped his shoulder against hers.
I don't know. Should we ask her?
No, Maria said. Walker chuckled.
I only see this unexpected meeting as a good thing.
Maria cast him a sideways glance, trying to ignore how good he looked in his casual attire. How's that?
Well, our first date will be a lot less awkward if you've already met my parents.
7. He said what? Sydney said over the phone. Maria had dropped off her mom, then immediately called Sydney and June. When they were both conferenced in, she told them all about the restaurant incident from beginning to end. Your boss asked you out, June added, astonishment in her voice. Maria was still astonished herself. It had taken everything she had to act normal and calm on the drive back with her mom. Not exactly in the traditional way, Maria explained. He brought up how our first date would be more like a third or fourth date since I've already met his parents. Oh my gosh, Sydney said. Yeah, June echoed. Oh my gosh. Maria's pulse drummed. You guys aren't helping. You're supposed to laugh and tell me that this was all a huge joke. I mean, this is Walker Harris, a stuffy suit. He doesn't meet any requirement on my list. Remind me of your list, June said. Well, after Josh, I added a few things, Maria said. But basically, my perfect man is someone I'm attracted to. Check, Sydney said. Maria ignored the interruption. Easygoing, which is not Walker. He seemed easygoing at the restaurant, June chimed in. Not helping. Steady job, Maria continued. Okay, he's got that. Not sure if he wants kids, and he says he doesn't have an ex-wife. So what else doesn't he qualify as? June asked. He's not okay with my fashion choices, Maria said. Although I have met his parents, but that's totally coincidental. He just has to uphold the company dress code, Sydney said. He definitely noticed what you wore last weekend at the sports bar. Well, Maria started, but she didn't have a comeback. Mm-hmm, Sydney said. That's what I thought. Like I told you Friday, dump that list. I agree, June said. You need to be more open-minded. Maria heaved a sigh. This was not why I called you guys. Both of her friends laughed. And by the time Maria was home and changed out of her lunch date clothes and wearing her lounge pants and tank shirt, she was second-guessing everything she'd thought about Walker. As she settled on her balcony with a cup of tea, her cell rang. Her breathing about stopped when she saw the caller ID, ex-boss. When she answered, Walker said, Are you missing something? What are you talking about? Maria asked, her heart thudding at the sound of his voice. His call was just unexpected, she told herself. Your purse, Walker said. You left it at the restaurant. I did? Maria said, standing to go search her kitchen counter. She could hardly believe she'd end up with her car keys and phone, but not her purse. But the purse wasn't anywhere to be seen. She must have been distracted after paying and grabbed her keys and left with her mom. And she knew who to blame for being distracted. Did you pick it up? She asked. I did. Maria paused, while Walker seemed to be waiting for her to say something else. Thank you, she finally said. I can get it from you at the office tomorrow. I thought I'd drop it off at your place right now, he said. Are you home? Maria started to feel a bit warm. You don't have to. I probably live a ways from you. I overheard your mom talking about the area you live in. Walker said.
It's not out of my way.
All right, Maria said, wanting to take it back the moment she said it. She couldn't imagine Walker taking the time to drive to her place and give her a purse.
Great. See you soon.
Walker was already saying. And then he'd hung up, and Maria wasn't sure what had just happened. She rushed to her bedroom and pulled on some yoga pants. At least they were better than her lounge pants with holes in them. Then she checked her fading makeup in the mirror and decided to put on a little more mascara. She must have lost track of time because when the doorbell rang, it seemed it had only been a couple of minutes since Walker had called. Taking a deep breath, she crossed to the door, straightening a couple of things as she went. When she opened the door, there was Walker, still in his jeans and polo shirt, and wearing a smile that she'd begun to appreciate more than she should.
I didn't interrupt a nap or anything, did I?
No, Maria said, taking the purse he held out. Thanks for this. He stood there, looking at her, and she finally said, Do you want to come in?
I was hoping you'd ask,
He said, stepping through the doorway, giving her another waft of his spicy scent. Really? Maria shut the door, crossed the small living space, and set her purse on the counter.
Really?
Walker said, not looking at her, since he was busy scanning her living room. When he did look at her, he said,
I'm starting to get you, Maria.
She folded her arms. And what's your conclusion? Walker took a couple of steps forward, and Maria refused to budge.
That you don't like to be told no, and you also don't like to be told what to do, he said in a low voice.
Maria arched a brow.
You definitely don't want to be stuffed in a corner and forgotten.
He moved closer, and although his nearness was making her heart beat like mad, she still held her ground.
Your mom's great,
he said. Maria almost smiled, but she didn't. Your parents are not what I expected at all. At least not after what you told me about juvie time and the whole I'm the boss, so shut up routine. Walker blinked, then a slow smile spread across his face.
If that's what some people think I'm like, I'm glad you know differently.
Do I?
Maria,
Walker said, moving even closer, so now she really couldn't catch a full breath.
You can't be shocked that I'm interested in you.
She looked into his green eyes, flecked with gold, and found the intensity in his gaze a bit disarming. Is it my yoga pants or my earrings? He chuckled and rested his hands on her waist. His touch sent a wave of heat through her body.
It's everything about you, no matter what you're wearing,
he whispered, his mouth dangerously close to hers. Well, Maria said in a breathless voice, I must admit that the casual look isn't so bad on you either. She put her hands on his shoulders and curled her fingers around his collar. There was no more encouragement needed, and Walker closed the distance between their lips and kissed her. His lips were warm and soft, and his kiss gentle, questioning. But when she moved her arms behind his neck and pulled him closer, he smiled against her mouth, then deepened his kiss. Maria's breath seemed to leave her as she kissed him back. One part of her was in disbelief that not only was she kissing her new boss, but that it was Walker Harris. The other part of her didn't care, as she became caught up in everything that was Walker. The way his hands moved to her lower back, pulling her even closer, and the way his mouth explored hers as if he'd been thinking of kissing her for a long time. Heat pulsed through Maria at the feel of this man, his hard angles complementing her curves, and she was feeling a bit lightheaded by the time he started to trail kisses along her jaw, then down her neck. She'd been kissed plenty of times, but Walker kissed her like he cherished her, which was ironic since he wasn't budging on the company policies, although he was currently breaking a pretty major one. Walker, she whispered, you're my boss. He murmured against her skin, his breath warm. He buried his face in her neck and ran his hands up her back. Goosebumps broke out along Maria's skin, and she let herself melt against him. She ran her fingers along his neck above his shirt collar. He turned his head and kissed her right below her ear.
"I'm really glad you left your purse,"
he whispered, then brought his hands up to cradle her face.
"You're beautiful. You know that?"
Before she could respond, he was kissing her again, and this time it was slower, his lips tasting hers and his tongue setting off a small fire in her stomach. When he pulled away, he gazed into her eyes.
"I don't know if I should apologize or kiss you again."
Maybe both, Maria said, feeling like she had stepped into another world that had turned everything normal in her life upside down. Walker grinned. Then he leaned forward and kissed her lightly.
"I should probably apologize too," he said. "I mean, I think I broke a couple of company rules."
Hmm, Maria said, running her hands over his shoulders, then back around his neck. If you can change the office relationships policy, what about the others? He shook his head.
"It's not that easy."
You mean you can break a corporate policy by kissing me, and then still tell me there's no compromise? Walker tangled his fingers in her hair.
"I'm only in your office until Tuesday, and even though I do oversee the training of you and your coworkers, I'll be working back in the corporate office, so—"
Maria watched him as he seemed to choose his words carefully.
"I'm thinking that we aren't officially in the same office starting on Wednesday, and so we won't be having an inter-office relationship."
You're splitting hairs, Maria said, drawing away from him, although he threaded his fingers through hers, keeping her close. If you can come up with that justification, then I want amendments to the policies in our specific office. Whatever you do with the rest of the corporation is up to you. Walker was quiet at this. Maria considered it a victory that he seemed to be at least thinking about it. You know I'm good at what I do, she said.
"I know,"
Walker said.
"and maybe there's something that can be done, but I'd have to discuss things with my father and the rest of the management team."
How hard can that be? She asked. Walker chuckled, his eyes scanning her face.
"You're used to getting your way, aren't you?"
Maria shrugged. Not always. Walker raised a brow.
"So tell me which wish of yours I can grant."
You want to be my personal genie? She said.
"Well, since it seems I can't stay away from you or stop thinking about you,"
he said in a slow voice, moving close again and wrapping his arms around her waist.
"I might as well ask."
I can't think of any special requests right now, but I'll let you know, she said.
"Sounds good,"
Walker said, leaning down and kissing her again just as his cell phone rang. He ignored it and continued to kiss her. You can get that, Maria said.
"No,"
Walker said. Maria laughed when the phone stopped ringing and started up again. Walker pulled out the phone from his pocket and turned it off.
"That's better."
8. Maria's heart hammered as she arrived at work Monday morning. Walker would be in the office for the next 2 days, and she wondered how she'd gotten herself into this situation again. First, she dated Josh secretly for months, and she'd made out with her new boss in her apartment. Now she'd have to coexist with him while keeping another secret. After Walker had left and the surprise and elation and warm tingles all over Maria's body had faded, she started thinking everything through. She'd even called Sydney in June. June hadn't answered, so Maria had poured out all of her woes and stupid decisions onto Sydney. And the more Maria talked to her friend, the more she worried that she was some sort of hookup for Walker while he was doing the employee training. But then again, she had met his parents, coincidentally. His parents seemed normal, and she hoped that meant that Walker wasn't leading her on, only to dump her tomorrow.
"You're early,"
Josh said as she set her purse down on her desk. She'd been so wrapped up in her thoughts that she hadn't even seen him leaning against the doorframe of his office. It took her a moment to come up with a reply, despite the fact that she dated this man. She wondered if he could tell what she'd been doing the night before just by seeing the rising blush on her face. I have a few things to get a head start on, she said. I feel like I'm still catching up from all the unexpected meetings last week. Josh nodded and started walking toward her. Oh, no. When he reached her cubicle, he shoved his hands in the pockets of his khakis and said, "Have you forgiven me?" Maria's brain didn't seem to be working because she had no idea what he was talking about. She blinked once, and twice. Josh moved closer, and Maria noticed he was wearing her favorite cologne, the cologne that she'd in fact bought for him. It brought back memories that she didn't feel like resurrecting right now. "For everything," he said in a quiet voice. She stared into his blue eyes, the eyes she used to trust. "Everything? What are you getting at?" Josh smiled and leaned against her desk and folded his arms so he was only inches apart from her. "For not backing you up in that meeting last week, for not introducing you to my parents and friends." He brushed his hand against hers. Maria stared at his hand as it linked with her own. "For not being open about our relationship," he continued, leaning toward her. Was he going to kiss her? In the office? No one was here yet but Lisa, who couldn't see them. Maybe 10 days ago, Maria might have found it romantic, but she'd written off Josh completely, with or without Walker invading the edges of her life. "Josh," she said, putting her hand on his chest to stall him. "We broke up, remember? It's not about forgiving. That should happen if we're still together, which we're not." Josh kept on leaning, his mouth curving into a smile, amusement in his eyes, as if he wasn't taking her seriously. Maria had to practically shove him away. Then she moved to the other side of the cubicle and folded her arms. "I already told you, Josh, it's over. Too much has happened, and too much never did happen." Josh narrowed his eyes. "It's about him, isn't it?" "Oh, I know about the ties, Maria," Josh continued. "And I've seen the way he watches you." He stepped forward, his eyes blazing. "How can you be so stupid? Walker Harris has a different girl every weekend. You're the flavor of the week." Maria burned with anger as she stared at Josh. "How do you know about Walker's personal life?" He barked out a laugh. "At least you're not denying it. Ever heard of Instagram?" Maria opened her mouth to reply, but the sound of the front door opening on the other side of the wall stopped her from saying anything. Josh stepped out of the cubicle as Ben walked into the office with a Starbucks cup. "You guys early?" he said, then went to his cubicle. Maria held her breath, but Ben said nothing else, and it was clear that Josh wasn't, after all, going to talk relationship with someone else within hearing distance. He shook his head as if she'd disappointed him again and walked to his own office, where he belonged. She sat down at her computer and turned it on. She wasn't going to check Instagram. She wasn't because, first, it would play right into what Josh had said, and second, it wasn't like she and Walker were really dating anyway. They'd shared a few kisses. Well, a lot of kisses. But there had been no commitments between them either way. She started to browse through company emails when she stopped on one that was titled "Requested Revision to Company Dress Code." Her heart hammered as she opened the email to see that it was from Walker to a list of executives. Her name wasn't on the list, so he must have BCC'd her. She checked the time the email was sent. 1 a.m. that morning. She scanned through the email, then read it slowly. The tingles came back. Walker had used some of her arguments in his email to the executives about how the employees, specifically at her company, enjoyed success regardless of their casual dress code. "So," Walker said, startling her out of her absorption, "what do you think?" She turned to see Walker standing at the edge of the cubicle. "About what?" she asked, trying to keep the smile from her face, but failing miserably. "Oh, so you're going to play coy," Walker said, his eyes gleaming with laughter, although he managed to keep a straight face. "It's well written," Maria said, leaning back in her chair, as if she wasn't affected at all by his grand gesture. "Do you think they'll rewrite it?" Walker held her gaze as he spoke, still keeping his distance, although making her feel like he was standing much, much closer. "I've also prepared an amendment that would apply to this office only." "Oh?" Maria asked. "What would the amendment say?" "Come into the conference room and I'll fill you in." Walker tugged off his tie and set it on her desk with a wink. Then he turned and left. Maria stared after him. She was still staring when Josh opened his office door and poked his head out. "Walker's here?" He went into the conference room, Maria answered, trying to organize her thoughts. She watched Josh cross over to the conference room and disappear inside. She turned back to the email and reread through it quickly. Walker had made a good argument, thanks to her, but the bottom line was that she was impressed. So then the only thing left to do was pull up Instagram on her phone. She'd started an account a couple of years ago, but most of the pictures were of her vacations with Sydney in June, which meant she posted a few pictures twice a year, and that was it. She typed Walker's name into the search feature. His name popped up about 8 times, but it wasn't difficult to find the picture that belonged to him. His green eyes and dark wavy hair were unmistakable. She tapped his profile, and a stream of pictures started to load. Well, Josh was right about one thing. Walker posted a lot, and there were quite a few women in them. His arm around this woman or that woman. He wasn't kissing any of the women, at least. So that was a good thing, right? She went through each picture more carefully. Did a picture with a woman mean he was dating them? She wasn't sure, and then one of the hashtags caught her attention. Hashtag Bay House Reunion. Maria Googled Bay House, and it turned out to be a nonprofit career center for women. Browsing through the website, she found that they trained women who'd been homeless and needed career development. They accepted monetary donations as well as donations of used professional clothing. She clicked on the About Us link and saw the name of Janine Walker as a member of the board. So the pictures were not women whom Walker was dating en masse. The door to the conference room opened and shut, capturing Maria's attention. She quickly switched screens on her computer so that when Josh walked by her desk, he wouldn't be able to see what she'd been looking at. But instead of walking on past, Josh stopped. Dread pulsed through Maria. What did he want now? "We need to talk, Maria," he said in a low voice, glancing around as if he didn't want anyone overhearing his request. "I'm in the middle of something," Maria said, although she could easily take a break. She'd been stalking Instagram. "Can it wait until lunch break?" It was then she noticed that Josh's face was flushed. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I'm not all right," Josh said, "and this can't wait until lunch. Meet me in my office." She watched him walk away, startled at his insistence. Josh hadn't been a particularly demanding person. In fact, he'd been the opposite, easygoing and too lax about things. She released a sigh and rose from her desk. She might as well get this over with. With or without a dress code change, maybe she should still find another job. Once she entered Josh's office, he shut the door behind her, then said, "He told me you two are dating." "Who, Walker?" Maria said, trying to catch up to what Josh was saying. "Yep," Josh said. "That means you're in violation of your employee contract, and I'm assuming Walker is too. I have to write up a report unless—" He stared at her. "Unless what? Unless I don't date him?" Maria asked. On one hand, she was secretly pleased that Walker had told Josh that they were dating. Josh deserved to hear that, even though she hadn't technically gone on a date with Walker. On the other hand, she couldn't figure out why Josh was set on attacking her like this. Josh looked at her, an eyebrow raised. "You're serious," she said. "I can't believe it. What do you want, Josh? We're not getting back together. Keeping our relationship a secret wasn't our only problem. It just covered up everything else." Josh moved back to his desk and sat down. He started typing on his keyboard. "I don't have any choice. I signed a contract to be honest in my dealings." "Fine," Maria said. "You do your job. I'm not planning on working here much longer." Josh stopped typing and looked up. "Walker said he's appealing the dress code." "I know," she said, suddenly tired and sick of this three-ring circus she was caught in the middle of. "There's too much history between you and me, and I don't want to feel stressed every day at work." Josh's gaze hardened, and he turned back to his keyboard and started typing again. "Just," Maria began, "keep Walker out of it. It's his dad's company, and I'll take the blame. I'm on my way out soon anyway." Josh didn't acknowledge her, but hopefully he heard her. Maria left his office and returned to her desk. She tried to concentrate on her current campaign while phones rang and conversation buzzed from the other cubicles, but her focus wouldn't return. She felt a hand on her shoulder that made her flinch. "Sorry," Walker said. "You were pretty focused there." Maria looked up into his piercing green eyes. She already felt guilty enough for the havoc she'd started, and now Josh had probably filed his contract violation report. Now she'd have to tell Walker. "Did you hear what Josh is going to do?" she asked.
Yes, and we need to talk.
9. The sushi restaurant was small and cozy and crowded, but when Walker spoke to the hostess, she ushered them toward the back where there was an open table. "Connections?" Maria asked as they sat down in the round booth. Walker's smile was brief.
I'm a regular, and I tip well.
Ah, Maria picked up the menu the hostess had set on the table, although she was nervous about this conversation with Walker. What had he and Josh talked about? She didn't even know where to begin the conversation. From all angles, it seemed that she'd be found in contract violation and fired. And what about Walker? He was a manager in Baker Corp. The words on the menu jumbled together, and finally Maria looked up at Walker to see him watching her. "So, I've decided," she said. "I'm leaving the company as soon as I can find a job. I hope I can find one before Josh can—"
I've already talked to my dad,"
Walker said, reaching across the space of the curved bench and taking her hand. Maria could only stare at their linked hands. Here it was. This was the termination speech.
I told him that I wasn't going to stop dating you.
This brought her gaze up.
I know we haven't technically been on a date, but I'm hoping that will change,"
Walker said. Maria exhaled. Was he really saying what she thought he was?
"My parents both know I like you,"
Walker continued, his thumb stroking the top of her hand.
"And, of course, Josh knows, and I'm sure more people will find out soon enough."
Heat traveled from his touch on her hand up her arm, getting dangerously close to her heart. "We haven't even been on a date," she said in a choked voice. "I mean, you're taking a lot of risk here."
"I'm 30, Maria," Walker said. "Give me some credit here. I like you, and that's enough for now. I was up half the night thinking about the company policies, and I came to one conclusion."
One side of his mouth lifted.
"You were right in everything. The policies need to be revamped, and most importantly, our employees need to be given the opportunity to have their say."
"What about the contract I signed?" Maria asked. "Not to be the devil's advocate, but Josh is doing his job."
"I'll quit if the board asks me to step down," Walker said, "and I'll find another job."
"You can quit over this? Over me? Over someone you met last week?" Walker chuckled.
"I really don't think it will come to that, but you need to know that I've met a lot of women, dated a lot of women, and none of them are like you."
Maria blew out a breath. "Don't do anything drastic because of me. I'd feel horrible." Walker scooted closer to her.
"Too late."
"What do you mean?" He tightened his hold on her hand and leaned toward her.
"I sent out a couple of emails right before lunch explaining to the board that I'm dating a beautiful, talented woman who happens to be an employee of our company. I offered to resign if the policies can't be amended. In other words, I've seen the error of my ways."
Maria's mouth dropped open. "You didn't. You can't." Walker was smiling now.
"I did, and I can."
When Maria couldn't come up with any coherent reply, Walker leaned toward her and kissed her on the mouth, right in front of a crowded restaurant. Her heart pounded as his hand cradled her face and he deepened the kiss. "You're crazy," she whispered when he pulled away. "Are you ready to order?" A woman's voice interrupted the haze that had overtaken Maria's mind. She flushed at being caught kissing in a public restaurant, but Walker didn't seem to have any such reservations. He smiled and ordered in a smooth tone. "I'll have the same," Maria said, not even sure what Walker had ordered. When the waitress left, Walker slipped his arm around her, making Maria feel like she was a teenager who couldn't be separated from her boyfriend for even 1 minute, so they had to cozy up in a restaurant booth. "So," Walker said, running his fingers along her neck and making Maria wish they were alone, somewhere far away from the people in the restaurant.
"How about tonight? Want to go out?"
"Now you're asking me out," she teased. "What if you find out you don't like me after all and you regret all of those emails you sent out?"
"I'd never regret them."
Walker said, kissing her right beneath her ear. He smelled so good, and his lips were like bursts of fire on her skin. We're in a public restaurant, Walker.
I love how you're calling me Walker now. And is that a yes?
He asked, his breath warm on her neck and sending a rash of goosebumps along her skin. She smiled, feeling herself melt into him. Yes.
Good,
Walker said, gazing into her eyes.
It's my friend's birthday gig tonight, and there'll be a band and lots of good food and wine. I want them all to meet you.
Maria shook her head. You are crazy. I mean, what are you going to tell them about me?
That I'm a lucky man,
Walker said, grasping her hand and bringing it to his lips. Maria laughed. You've got to tone down the charm. The customers are starting to stare. Walker chuckled, and just then the waitress showed up with their order. They ate and talked, and no matter what Maria said, she couldn't convince him to go to the birthday gig without her. When they returned to work, Walker told her he had afternoon meetings at corporate and would pick her up from her apartment that night. Maria walked into the office by herself and found Josh sitting in her chair waiting. No one else had returned from lunch, so it was the two of them. What are you doing? Maria asked, trying to keep her voice neutral when, in fact, she was truly annoyed. Josh stood and shoved his hands into his pockets.
You're really gonna date Walker Harris?
Maria lifted her chin. Yes.
Even if it costs you your job?
He pressed. There are other jobs, Maria said. I don't agree with the new policies anyway. Josh blew out in frustration.
How can you throw everything we had together away? Just like that, you're dating our boss and you're flaunting it in front of everyone.
You're the only one who knows about us in this office, Josh, and you're the one filing reports about it. Maria folded her arms. I don't get you.
I'm in love with you.
Josh grasped her arm and pulled her toward him.
It's killing me to think of you with Walker or any other man. I made a mistake.
Maria put her hand on his chest to stop him from leaning down, but Josh used his other hand to pull her closer.
I haven't sent the reports yet. Please give me another chance, and I'll forget I ever talked about any reports.
No, Josh. Maria pulled out of his grasp. She didn't like the desperate sound of his voice. She picked her purse up. I'll be working from home the rest of the afternoon.
Wait, Josh said. Hear me out.
Maria didn't respond. She hurried out of the office and into the parking lot. She wasn't afraid of Josh, but he was being way more persistent than she was comfortable with. Once she got in her car, she put on her Bluetooth. Instead of calling one of her friends, they'd both be slammed at their own jobs, she called Walker.
Do you want to press charges?
Walker asked in a steely tone after she'd told him what Josh had said in the office. No, she said. He's belatedly upset over the breakup. Maybe it's post-traumatic stress or something, or maybe he realized that he really did like me.
He said he loved you,
Walker reminded her. I don't think he truly does, Maria said. And even if he did, it's still over. Walker exhaled.
I'm going to talk to him. This needs to end.
What about your meetings? His reply was firm.
You're more important than any meeting. And it's not like Josh is going to go away anytime soon. I need to see if he's even trustworthy at this point.
Maria had the same fear, although it was hard to comprehend. All right, she finally said. I'll be in my apartment working remotely.
I'll call you as soon as I talk to him.
It was over an hour later when Walker called, and by then Maria was pacing her apartment, her work forgotten. She snatched up her cell when she saw ex-boss on the screen. She really had to change the contact name.
He's not sending the reports in,
Walker said as soon as she answered. What? How did she manage that?
I told him he'd be welcome to send them, but I'd also be sending in a complaint of my own about how he's harassing you.
Maria was stunned. So what did he say?
He admitted that he thought you two would get back together, Walker said. I told him to take a couple of days off, take a break from everything at the office.
Maria exhaled. That's a good idea. I wasn't looking forward to seeing him again in the morning.
We'll get this all figured out,
Walker said in a soft voice. I know. She crossed to the balcony and stepped out into the cloudy day.
So, are you still coming with me tonight?
He asked. Yes, she said. And thanks for talking to Josh. I'm sure it was awkward on more than one level.
Not a problem, Walker said. And by the way, you can wear anything you want.
Maria laughed, as if I need to be told that. When she hung up with Walker, she found that she was really looking forward to meeting his friends. It would give her a better sense of the man he was, although she had a feeling she knew enough about him to decide he was pretty amazing, and that she was the one who was lucky. 10.
Mmm,
Walker said, leaning in to kiss Maria on the cheek.
you look great.
You don't look too bad yourself, she quipped as he drew back, and it was true. He wore a navy button-down shirt open at the collar and khaki pants. He hadn't shaved that evening, so dark scruff on his face poked through. Maria wore a deep coral dress, fitted, yet casual. She'd paired it with her favorite silver sandals and the largest silver hoop earrings she owned. She'd elected to leave her hair down and straightened. Walker hadn't moved too far from her, and his fingers skimmed her arm.
Ready?
He asked, a lazy smile on his face. Yep, she said. Do you still want me to meet your friends?
They'll think I'm a lucky guy,
Walker said with a wink, then extended his hand. She placed hers in his, and they walked out of her apartment. Once in his car, she relaxed on the seat, trying to keep herself calm, even though she was feeling pretty keyed up. The good thing was that Walker seemed to like her outfit choice. He had let his gaze linger more than once. The light's green, Maria said while they were waiting for a traffic light.
Oh, thanks,
Walker said, a smile on his face. He reached over and grabbed her hand.
I'm not going to be able to keep my eyes off of you tonight in that dress.
Maria laughed. That's kind of the idea. The party was in full swing when they arrived at the outdoor cafe. It appeared that Walker's friends had booked the entire place. Maria was swept up in introductions, and she loved the way Walker kept an arm possessively about her as if she belonged to him. She liked that feeling. She also liked the way several of the women watched her as if she'd taken some prize from them. Walker had chosen her, for whatever reason, and she was proud of it. When the dancing started up, Walker drew her onto the dance floor, then pulled her into his arms. She wrapped her arms about his neck and nestled against him. Their bodies seemed to complement each other perfectly. Although the beat was fast, he danced at a slow rhythm with her.
What do you think?
He asked. She smiled. I think your friends are really nice, but some of the women are giving me glares. Walker ran a hand up her back, sending shivers along her skin. So, what's the story? Is there an ex-girlfriend or two here? Walker kissed her neck. I'm talking to you, Mr. Harris. He lifted his head at that.
Belle's the woman with the blonde hair and red dress. We dated for about a year, but I knew going into it that it would never get serious.
It wasn't hard for Maria to remember Belle. Her name could have been Barbie. So, it was for fun?
In her mind, it was just a way to get back at her ex-fiancé,
He said. Maria brushed her fingers along Walker's neck. Only one ex here tonight? Walker smiled, and
Rachel has the short brown hair and is wearing a blue top.
She said. What's that story?
She apparently had a crush on me for a long time,
Walker said.
Right after the breakup with Belle, I took Rachel out a few times. We never clicked.
Her opinion or yours? Maria asked. Walker pulled her closer.
Mine, and that's all that matters. None of those women are you.
I like the sound of that, Maria whispered against his skin. Walker slowed his movements as they danced, and bit by bit, Maria knew she was falling in love with this man. Come what may, she believed him when he said things would work out.
So,
he said, his voice deep and vibrating against her.
What are your plans for the next year?
She laughed. Am I on the year plan like Belle?
No,
Walker said, drawing back so he could run his thumb along her lower lip before pressing a gentle kiss on her mouth. Obviously, he had no problem with PDA.
It's as far as my calendar will schedule out.
Then we need to get you a new calendar, she said. I don't think a year is enough.
Walker grinned, then kissed her again. Let's get out of here and get started on that calendar.
Maria couldn't agree more. This has been Falling for Maria, written by Heather B. Moore, narrated by Exie Sands. Copyright 2017-2018 by Heather B. Moore. Production copyright by Heather B. Moore, 2018.